Welcome back to our week of exploration on fear with Miles Kessler. Miles is in Tel Aviv. I'm in Portugal. You are scattered around a bit over the world. So, yeah, thank you. So, welcome. Here we are for another hour of practice. Won't be long today, just reminding you that we have an hour long together. You can, at the end, there'll be some time for questions, and you can ask your questions in the chat box. Please type question in capital letters so that we know that you are asking a question rather than just a comment. Little word about dana, the practice of generosity, and the ground base for this whole platform, this whole sangha to keep on. We don't have any other source of income other than your donation. So if this day, this morning, this time, your heart is inclined to that and you can follow your heart, please use the link that I've put in the chat. I've pinned it on the top so it stays visible. I hope so. It's visible, and you can use that. And if you can't donate, please just stay with us. Your practice and your presence is already a very good donation. Okay, so welcome to you all, wherever you are, however you are, and let's practice together. Thank you.
Jorge, I'm not sure if you're there, but there we go. Okay. Thank you, Jorge. And thank you for the invitation to practice together. That's what we're here for. And welcome everybody to our second day in this exploration of fear, courage, and surrender, the way of the spiritual warrior. And we're going to look a little bit deeper into that today. A lot of what I talk about is just going to be whether we're speaking in the topic of fear and fearlessness or not. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is just straight up meditation related, but it's also related to the topic of fear and fearlessness. And so what the reason I say is because for some of us, fear is more of the question, the contemplation of fear and fearlessness might be more present. For some people, certainly in my case, it was strongly present at certain periods in my life. Other periods, not at all. But I do recognize that for some people, it's kind of constant. It's something that stays with them for longer periods of time, even lifetimes. And there are even people, believe it or not, and I've met them, where it's just not an issue for them ever, somehow. So that's all about. We all have our karma in relationship to this topic of fear and fearlessness, and so just kind of keeping that in that general context. Today we're going to look at the practical teaching. Today is going to be about Zanshin, which is this beautiful term out of Japanese martial arts, Aikido, including Aikido, which is my lineage, and it also is a term related to the Zen tradition. Yesterday we spoke about Shoshin, which is the beginner's mind. Today we're going to look at Sho means beginner, the beginning. Shin is mind. You could say heart. You could say consciousness. You could say mind, heart. They don't make the distinction in Asian languages between what we would say mind and heart. That's one thing. And Shoshin is the beginner's mind, having that beginner's approach. Zanshin it quite literally means sustaining mind, or for the sake of our practice, sustaining presence, or to be even more specific for our practice, sustained mindfulness. So as we get closer to our sitting period, I'm going to talk a little bit about that sustained mindfulness, what that is. But let's zoom out. Let's zoom out. Let's zoom out. Let's zoom out. In the Swiss Alps, there is a water source. Kind of comes up through the mountain, and all the snow melting as well. And that water source flows down the mountains, flows down the hills, flows down the Alps, flows into all of the European countries. In fact, it is the source of the four major rivers in Europe. The Rhine, which, if I'm not mistaken, forgive my geography here, people, the Rhine, which flows into the Atlantic, I think, pretty sure. The Rhone, which flows into the Mediterranean. Forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but I think that's right. The Po, the River Po, flows into also the Mediterranean, but it flows into the Adriatic Sea. And the Danube, which flows into the Black Sea. All of those rivers, I mean, they go in four different directions. And downstream, there's so many, there's 100 million different variations of flora and fauna, of culture and languages and people and the way people be with each other. There's so many differences in tribes and cultures, and I said cultures and countries and nationalities. It's really, literally a million different variations of life or manifestation that flow down those rivers. And yet they all come from one source. One source. They all come from the same source. Now, when it comes to fear and fearlessness, that question, that issue, is quite literally, well, let's say in this metaphor, so it's not literal. In this metaphor, the question of fear and fearlessness is a downstream question. It's not an upstream question, it's a downstream question, right? Quite literally, in our practice, the question of fear and fearlessness is a downstream question. What are we, how do we, what am I to do? Or woe is me? Because as you go downstream, your stream, your little neck of the woods, your stream is going to be kind of familiar, comfortable, more or less. But all those other streams, oh my God, there's lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. A million different variations. But upstream, at the source, the question of fear and fearlessness does not exist. In our kind of human experience, the separate sense of miles has a boundary. And inside of this boundary is me and mine, maybe my kids, my people. Outside of this boundary is other. And the fear is generally outside of the boundary. There could be fear about stuff inside of the boundary, but if you really look at it, you're afraid that they're going to not be in the boundary or something. Those questions, as legitimate as they may be, or they might just be complete fantasies, God bless us all. Those are downstream questions. Those are questions that the issue of fear and fearlessness is a downstream issue, and it is an issue of the sense of self. And I said it yesterday, I'll say it again today, I'll probably say it again tomorrow. Our basic spiritual injunction is no self, no problem. All of these fears can also be experienced as a problem. All of these, when I say these, all of our fears can also be experienced as a problem or can be experienced as a basic unsatisfactoriness. It's just like, I'm here in my studio. The dojo's on the other side of this wall. And did I hear something over there? Is somebody sneaking into the dojo? Is it a thief? Is it somebody? I don't know what's going on over there. All of that is on the other side of this wall. It's out there. It's not in here. It's out there, whether it's true or not true. And the reason it's out there is because I'm in here and there's a boundary. So all of our issues around fear are issues about the self. When there's a self, there will be issues. There will be sometimes problems. There will be a basic unsatisfactoriness subjectively for the self. The self dissolves through the practice of mindfulness meditation. When the self relaxes, when the self boundaries, that sense of self, recedes to the background, when the self pops like a balloon and you're just being in a very, very profound way or in a rather kind of relatively minor way. The moment of that experience is that there just are no problems. That's the taste of that experience. There are no problems. No self, no problems. But as long as there's a self, there's also an other. So the Upanishads, thousands of years ago, 4,000 years ago, when they were written, there's a beautiful line. Where you find other, there too you shall find fear. Where you find other, there too you shall find fear. I'm just reading here. Rivka, thanks, Rivka. Just happened to see that she asked me to speak a little bit slower, so apologies for that. I'll see if I can't slow it down. Does that make sense? Thumbs up, maybe. Yeah. Where there is self, where there is other, there too you shall find fear. So no self, no problem. No other, no fear. We go back to the metaphor of this downstream rivers, all the rivers in Europe, or there's the source and the river. At the source, there is no self. At the source, there is no other. At the source, there is no duality. But the very first moment of downstreamness, there's a split of self and other, a split of subjective and objective. A split downstream that continues to multiply in all these crazy different forms of self and other. Welcome to the world of fear and fearlessness. So, one quick word about fear and fearlessness, then I'll talk about some practical things. So, fear implies duality, self-other duality. That's that downstream fear. Fearlessness also implies duality. And what that means is we often say that courage is not being free of fear in a perceived danger or challenging situation, but courage is having fear, but still going forward on that path, that dangerous path. That's what we call courage. It's not the absence of fear. It is having fear, but still proceeding. Some people are risk tolerant. I'm quite risk tolerant for better and for worse. So there's fear and I just kind of go anyways. A little bit of denial, a little bit of stupidity. I just go. And sometimes, yeah, great. That was the right thing to do. Other times like, oops, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Should have listened to the fear. Other people are going to be risk adverse or risk avoidant. There's something fearful and they're just not going to go forward. And this is really just kind of a personality type. Nothing's good or bad about either one of these. It's just how it is. But this all exists in that realm of fear and fearlessness. It exists in the realm downstream. As I was saying before, at the source, there is no self, there is no other. At the source, fear is not even an issue. It's not fear or fearlessness. It's just non-fear. It's just not there. So it is good to develop a certain tolerance for fear and still go forward. When you determine it's safe enough to do that. It's also important to listen to your fear and put up some boundaries and maybe back off when you determine that that's maybe the smarter thing to do. What was his name? Albert Camus. He said, always go too far, and that's where you'll find the truth. So we go too far, and we find out, I crossed that line. I shouldn't have crossed that line, and we learn the hard way. Or we cross that line, and we discover, oh my God, there's so much more freedom here. That fear wasn't helping me. I went through it, and I discovered more. That's something we're going to learn in life. Wisdom, lifetime wisdom, or conventional wisdom is developed through those two experimenting with those two types of fear, or those two situations. Fear be damned, or fear be trusted. But you can see that our human dilemma, that's always going to be there. And the human liberation from this dilemma, the floor plan to the prison of samsara, is thoroughly known. The way upstream to the source is thoroughly known. It's known in many, many different traditions. Buddhism just being one. There are maps. There are processes. There are guides. There are ways to learn all this stuff. We can do it. In our meditation practice, of course, we need concentration. So if anybody here is practicing samatha, doing samatha practice and good old concentration practices, that's great. You need to have concentration. But you don't need to practice samatha to develop concentration. If you really, really, really want to go like super far in the meditation practice, you almost have to do. In fact, I would say you must do samatha practice. But early on, you don't need to do it. You can traverse the whole path. You can get all the way to the source without samatha because the concentration is developed along the way. But the key for going upstream, very simple. It's the practice of mindfulness. That's it. We just drop in to the present moment, being mindful of whatever's arising in our experience in the body, in the sensations, in the feelings, in the mind and all its myriad of mental formations, in my consciousness itself. Those are the four foundations of mindfulness. We kind of become mindful of all that's arising, know it for what it is. It's a breath, it's tension, it's an itch, it's a thought, it's a memory, it's happiness, it's sadness, it's whatever it is. We know it for what it is. We know its qualities and characteristics. So as we know it and stay with that, we'll know it a little bit deeper and we'll know more qualities about it. And then we'll begin to know how it's changing. That simple mindfulness process is the very process that systematically, automatically, naturally leads us upstream, returns us to the source. So mindfulness is the key. Mindfulness is the key. And it can be a long path to get to the source, but at the same time, and some of you will probably know this from your own experience, you can taste the source. And you will taste the source from time to time. You'll taste the source where there's no self, there's no problem. You'll taste the source where the quality is that there's no experience of others, so there's no fear. It's non-fear, and it's liberation. Sometimes you can experience that sitting in the presence of other meditators. Sometimes you can experience that sitting in the presence of teachers. Sometimes you'll experience that in listening to Dharma talks, whether it's like today or whether it's like something on YouTube, or even reading a talk from 2,000 years ago. It can happen. It can awake. Like in Christianity, they say, when two people come together, Jesus said, when two people come together in my name, there too I shall be. Oh my God. So we come together like we're coming together now in Sangha Live, not in a downstream way. We're not organizing around downstream concerns, which there are plenty to organize around, like in a good way. We're here organizing around upstream concerns. We're putting mindfulness in the middle of our meeting. And everybody's not just organizing around that, like collectively, but internally, our consciousness is beginning to organize around that. Can you feel that? Like right now, can you feel yourself starting to organize around just being present in the present moment? This is the mindfulness that systematically leads us upstream. And that upstream process can be harrowing, can be difficult, there are challenges. It does take, in many ways, a heroic effort, dare I say. It's a hero's journey to traverse upstream. And in that sense, the issue of fear and fearlessness is a very real concern, and we want to practice with that in one way or another. I'm leaving that open as a koan. But upstream, at the source, it's just non-fear. And it's important to know that, because that becomes our compass point. That becomes our true north. That's why we are here. Oh my God. That's the reason we're here. Everything else is downstream. And a true man or a true woman or a true person of the Dharma will always keep that in mind. We'll never forget that. Or when we forget it, we bring it back into when we remember, we bring it back into the center of things. And, when it comes to downstream concerns, by all means, engage. So, Zanshin, the sustained awareness. And this is where we're going to begin to go into practice. And you can even, I'm trying to, my meditation clock got screwed up here. I don't know what's going on. Sometimes it does that. I'll just do it. There we are. So Zanshin is a sustained mindfulness, sustained presence. Now, it turns out in Buddhist psychology, there are two mental factors that sustain our mindfulness. This is called vitakka and vichara. These are two mental factors that are in samatha meditation. Once you access concentration, you get in that first absorption. The dominant mental factors are vitakka, vichara. I'll explain those in a minute. But they're also there in vipassana meditation, in mindfulness meditation. Vitakka, vichara are none other than the initial application of the mind, vitakka, and the sustained application of the mind. Mindfulness in our mindfulness-based meditation is momentary mindfulness. And what that means is there's a moment of mindfulness that links to another moment of mindfulness, that links to another moment of mindfulness, that links to another moment, that links to another moment, until we create an unbroken chain of mindful moments. Sounds good. Not easy. What we do is we create one moment, one link, then another link, then another link, and then we think, oh my God, I'm linking them together. It's so great. And then the chain is broken. Okay. Whew. Become mindful again. We return, accept what's going on, and we reapply the mind. That's the vitakka. Every time the mind slips away, we remember it, accept that we've slipped away. Okay, not a problem. And we reestablish. We reactivate, we reapply our mindfulness to the moment. Something in the body, something in the mind, something in the senses. It doesn't matter. We reapply it to an anchor point. Vitakka, the initial application of the mind. You will do this several times in every meditation practice. Hopefully, you will do this several times in the meditation practice. If you're only doing it once or twice, there's a good chance that there's a lot of wandering mind. Or you could be a super yogi where the mind is not going anywhere. Chances are it's the former, not the latter. Vichara, vitakka vichara, is that sustaining it. So we initially apply the mind, and then we know it again, and we know it again, and we know it again in this moment, in this moment, and in this moment, and in this moment. This is Zanshin. And what we're knowing in each moment is new, which is Shoshin, the beginner's mind. Knowing it as if for the first time, because it actually is for the first time. Take the breath for an example. So we establish our mindfulness by applying the mind to somewhere in the body with the breath. Could be here. Some people like this. Some schools teach more in the belly. It doesn't really matter. It's good to have one place. I should say it does matter. You want to stay with one place, at least for a while, at least for a few minutes, and then you can travel around. But that's the concentrating part, holding it in one place, gently holding it in one place. Initially apply the mind, and then sustain that. I don't have my bell with me, but imagine ringing a bell. When you hit the bell, boom, that's the initial application of the mind. And then the peal, boom, is the sustained application of the mind. What we usually do is bong, bong, and then squirrel or whatever. We're off somewhere. Okay, pretty. I think if you're a meditator, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So our job is to with right effort, and I use that term really, really gently, sustain the mindfulness with the experience, moment by moment by moment. Okay? Let's practice. Mindfulness is the practice that leads us upstream. Zanshin is taking the initial application of the mind and sustaining that mindfulness moment by moment by moment. Should the mind wander off, when the mind slips away, and it will, not a problem. Accept that, reapply the mind, and then sustain that moment by moment. So let's sit together. Finding a comfortable position, eyes closed. Take a moment and just check in with the body and knowing whatever physical experience is kind of jumping to the mind. It's usually the dominant experience. The mind goes to it automatically. And as you become mindful of that, know that you're initially applying that mindfulness to that experience, and know its qualities and characteristics, then knowing what happens to it is that sustained application of the mind. And after you do your body check-in, helps you anchor in the present moment, shift for a moment to the mind and just kind of notice what is the quality and characteristics of the mind. Full acceptance, whatever's going on in the mind, without preference, just knowing what it is, know the qualities and characteristics, and as you continue to mindfully observe what happens to that mental state. This is the sustained application of the mind. This is the sustained knowing. This is the Zanshin. And should you have your own personal established meditation practice, feel free to continue along with that. What I'm going to offer now at this point is to come to the breath, returning to the breath as your home base. And see if you can stay in one location of the breath. Traditionally, that's either at the tip of the nostrils, tip of the nose, at the nostrils, or in the belly. In the nostrils, you'll notice very, very subtle changes in sensations. In the belly, you'll also notice sensations and changing sensations, but in the movement of the belly as you breathe in, and in the movement of the belly as you breathe out. The type of mindfulness we are practicing is momentary mindfulness, and we're linking one moment of mindfulness with the next, and linking that with the next until we have a sustained mindfulness. Knowing the qualities, characteristics, and sensations of the breath, knowing any new characteristics or qualities that begin to appear through your sustained observation. And as you sustain or continue to sustain your mindfulness, knowing what happens, knowing any changes that are arising. Initially applying the mind, sustaining the application of the mind with each breath in each moment, moment by moment, breath by breath. Bringing your mindfulness back to the body. Feel the body. Bring your mindfulness back to the mind and know the mental state. Feeling the space on the inside. And as you slowly open your eyes, feeling the space on the outside. And give yourself a few moments to come out of the meditation practice. All right. So we'll take the last 14 minutes, whatever we have here, for questions. I see that Mr. Selenstruck, if I pronounce that correct. Anyways, I see somebody already left a question here. I've got a few questions from yesterday left over, so I'll take one of those first, and then I'll go to the question here. Let's see. Yeah, yesterday, David Barron asked me a question. I wasn't quite sure what the question meant, and there was like a minute left, so I kind of moved on. But I see it now, and it's a little bit more clear. So David asked, it seems that thought outside of our intrinsic systems could be a kind of fear. What is your take on this? So intrinsic systems, if I understand correctly, it's the sense doors, and that, the lions and tigers and bears that we're afraid of come to us through the sense door. So I see a danger, or I hear a danger, I smell a danger, I taste a danger, or I sense a danger. And then what David says here is that it seems that thought beside those senses, thought is a kind of fear. Yeah. So in Buddhist psychology, there's not 5 senses, there's 6 senses. So there's the eyes, the ears, the nose, the seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, feeling, sensations. And there's the mind. So that's also considered a sensation. And it happens to be that those 6 doors are objects of observation in our meditation practice. And pleasant experiences can arise in all 6 of those doors. And unpleasant experiences can and will arise in all 6 of those doors. And a sense of self, where our sense of self is embedded, is in each one of those domains. And it's correct what you said, David, that fear can also just be something in the mind. Often it is. We have we human beings are biologically wired to survive. That means that the human beings that were chilled and not so stressed out about survival back in the cavewoman days, the saber-toothed tiger came along and ate those people up. They did not survive the human experience. They were not naturally selected into the human project. They were naturally selected out of the human project. The ones that survived and brought us where we are today were pretty damn paranoid. And they are our ancestors. And we are quite literally hardwired to fear, to survive. And that can be in any of the sense doors and the mind, as you say. Okay, so let's go to the next question here. There's 2 more questions. So let's see how far we get. And if anybody else has a question, feel free to bring it up. I will ask a quick question. Somebody wrote, what are the Japanese terms from yesterday? Shoshin, Shoshin. Shoshin means beginner's mind. Today we're talking about Zanshin, Zanshin, which is sustained mind, or sustained presence, sustained awareness. Okay, so Mr. Celis the Rook, 71. Sorry for the pronunciation. Do you think that a sustained ability of focus during practice is compromised in ADHD? Any suggestions on how to work with it? I wouldn't. I mean, I'm not going to say it's compromised. It can definitely be more challenging for those of us who are a little bit ADHD or ADD, and then even more so, I suppose, with ADHD. And one of the best non-medical interventions for ADHD or for ADD is the practice of mindfulness. It might be a heavy lift. It might take a little bit longer than somebody who's doesn't necessarily have attention issues. But the focusing of the mind with mindfulness meditation is an antidote to ADHD and ADD. And even though it may seem like if you have more of an ADD and ADHD, I'm ADD, by the way, or I was back in the day, and on a good day I'm not, on a bad day I still am. I did my practice. I'm still doing my practice, but I completed the practice in terms of the classical teachings, and it took me a long time, but ADHD be damned. I was able to do it with courageous effort, heroic effort, right effort, and tons of patience, a fair amount of persistence, and ultimate perseverance. So I hope that answers your question. Sally Waters asks, how is the practice of fearlessness related to trauma-informed mindfulness? Well, I'm not a student of trauma-informed mindfulness, although I'm certainly aware of a certain amount of trauma in myself. I'm certainly aware of trauma in basic theory, and I'm aware of trauma in others, and I'm aware of trauma in students. Fearlessness. Well, let's put it this way. So trauma means that there's a traumatized part of ourself. Could be physical, could be mental. I mean, it's always a combination, but it could be like a physical trauma, a car accident or something like that. Or it could be, abusive situation. Physical abuse is obviously physical trauma, but there's also psychological abuse that could be very traumatic, and all kinds of other trauma, war. Trauma shatters the self, divides the self, splits the self, breaks the self into parts. And this is a very general way, a general description. God bless us all. Healing is the healing and reintegration of those parts into wholeness. Okay, so trauma work kind of requires us to hopefully with some good support to gently come back in touch with the original trauma. Yeah, makes sense. So if that thing happened back then, oh my God, and I go running around my life trying to, live the best I can, but that thing is still back there in my psyche, is like the only way for me to be free, healed, and whole again is to go back there. It's and that's why we need support. So the process of getting closer and closer to that original trauma, which caused the split, it needs to be gentle and supported, and incremental, hopefully incremental. And each increment we develop tolerance, and each increment there can be more fear. And as we get closer and closer to the original trauma, the fear is going to be heightened. Yeah. So if we do it gently and with good support, we're going to get closer and closer, we're going to develop more and more tolerance for that fear as it's coming up, until we can come into contact with the original trauma. And this is a very, very simplistic explanation. Catharsis, kind of go through all of that emotional processing that just we couldn't process back then, which could be intense, but it's healing. It's the healing, especially when it's done in a therapeutic context. It's healing, and it reintegrates who we are, brings us back to wholeness. So I hope that simplistic answer helps. Sally, thanks for that question. And by the way, I'm not a trauma expert. And the other thing I'll say is that trauma work is very different than our meditation work. Please make that distinction. or work with somebody who makes that distinction. Mindfulness practice is both. Meditation practice, trauma work, they're different. They require different contexts, different methodologies. Okay, bringing them together would be trauma-informed mindfulness practice. Okay, thanks, Sally. That's a great question. Next question is from Sinclair Taylor. Hi, Sinclair. Today, the grip of fear in my stomach was overwhelming, vice-like. I could not return to the breath in any meaningful way. How can I handle this better? Well, Sinclair, this is where our chat has its limitations, but just imagine that we were together now. I could speak to you. First thing I would say, were you mindful of the grip of fear in the stomach? And I guess you would say yes, because you wrote about it. Then I would ask the question, what are you mindful of? And I'm assuming you would say I was mindful of the tension. I was mindful of this. I was mindful of fear coming up. I was mindful of maybe my mind running in a bunch of associations. That's great. So you're mindful of all the things that are around that. We're not dealing with the breath right now. We're dealing with the dominant experience, which would be the quote unquote vice-like grip of fear in your stomach. If it's too intense, you need to, I recommend backing off for a bit, just relax the concentration and kind of restabilize, maybe breathe, do some regulation. If you can tolerate it, be mindful of it, stay with it. And usually when we're mindful, it intensifies. When we become mindful of an unpleasant experience, like really right there with it, what will happen is it usually will intensify for a bit. And then it will de-intensify, and then it will start to kind of process. So if you can do that, know what it is. In this case, forget the breath. It is the dominant experience was the grip of fear in your belly, the vice-like fear. Know its qualities and characteristics, everything that's associated with it. Stay with that. Sustain your mindfulness, vitakka vichara, and then know what happens to it. And three things are going to happen, and only three things. It's going to become more intense. It's going to become less intense, or it's going to stay the same. Those are the three things. If it becomes more intense, eventually it's going to become less intense and disappear. If it stays the same, eventually it's either going to become it's either going to become more intense, but then it will become less intense and then it'll disappear. If it becomes less intense, it's going to become less intense and it's going to disappear. Sustaining the mindfulness is staying through that process. Yeah. If it's tolerable. Caveat is always, if you need self-care, back off, take self-care. Then once more into the breach, dear friend. Going into the breach, so to speak, facing these again and again, sustaining our awareness, even if it's just a few seconds, we're developing a tolerance for these challenging situations, and eventually they'll lead us through. And if it's something that needs trauma help, then by all means, seek out some therapy. Okay, let's see. That was a great question, Sinclair. Thank you. All right. So that's going to be it today. You know what? I might be able to take one more question that was in the email. What question? That was a wake-up reminder for me too. No, they're not short questions. So I have two more questions. There's three more questions. I think I'm going to save those for tomorrow. I do want to say tomorrow, rather than do questions, I'm going to be offering a hot seat interview. So we're going to I'll do the teaching at the beginning. We'll do the sitting practice. And then I'm going to invite one person to come on screen with me and do a meditation interview. I'm going to ask you about your practice. Many people here in this call have done interviews with me, so you kind of know what that's like. So not you, please. We'll let somebody else come in. And you have to be willing to come on screen. You have to be willing to share. Sorry. First, you have to be willing to come on screen. Then you have to be willing to oh, come on. Sorry. I got to use my hands. I don't know what to do. I'm going to do this. First, you have to be willing to come on screen. Then you have to be willing to share about your practice. And number three, you have to be willing to receive guidance. That's the hot seat. Oh, and you have to be willing to do that in front of everybody. That's the hot seat. It can be very beneficial if somebody wants to do it. We did this last time I did it, and I think a lot of people got benefit from it. So that'll be tomorrow, okay? And then tomorrow's topic, yesterday we looked at Shoshin, beginner's mind. Today, Zanshin, sustained mind, or sustained mindfulness, sustained presence. And tomorrow we'll be looking at Mushin, no mind, in the face of fear and fearlessness. Okay, our work is done here. I want to wish you all a great day. And may this practice of sustained mindfulness, the initial application of the mind, the sustained application of mind, may this lead you further on your path. And may it lead you deeper in the practice of mindfulness based meditation. Thank you, everybody.